Hello, Online Learning Overview. I'm Scott Johnson, and you may recognize my name. You've most likely heard directly from me, given that I'm director of the Illinois Online Network and chief cook and bottle washer of mvcr.org. Your course facilitator and I concluded that it might make a good discussion to visit the notion that guest lectures are valuable and viable options for online teaching and learning. Further, as an online learning administrator, I'm going to explore the administrative and technical steps needed to make this happen. First, let's look at a few reasons for guest lectures. I've got a few reasons, and I'm eager to hear from the class who have additional ideas. Now, one of the biggest reasons is to bring in a knowledgeable visitor to the class environment. Long ago, in a galaxy far away, I had a few guests with specific expertise or knowledge about a topic under consideration in the course I was teaching. And I'm confident in the proposition that a guest lecturer may be accepted with special consideration over the instructor, that is, as being more credible in some specific area of expertise. Now, someone or many may have requested such a visitor, and the instructor uses his or her discretion to bring the guest in. Another option, however real or presumed, is covering an anticipated absence. If one knows of a trip or short notice medical emergency or who knows what else, during which fulfilling teacher duties would be difficult, inviting a guest lecturer to cover the class may have some merit. There may be policies in place that make this impossible, but I'm assuming otherwise. Aside from the occasional instance of magnanimous giving, in which someone just provides this guest experience with no expectation of it being returned, I suspect that the most common occurrence is an exchange. You guest for mine, and I'll guest for yours. So perhaps you know of someone who's going to be out of town or at a conference, having surgery, other medical leave, and you suggest or offer to guest for them while they're out. They can reciprocate when they come back, or of course you can use the opportunity, if it applies to you, to ask for help. Now, one of the technical issues, or logistical ones, is to be sure that the individual is up to the task. Obviously, if you're going to have someone guest lecture in an online class, they're going to need adequate and appropriate access and the requisite skill to carry this off without too much trouble. In the event that you have an extraordinary guest who has little skill, one can be the interpreter or can provide an assistant who conveys the questions and provides the service of relating the answers back into the system. Now, I've done email interviews in which a handful of questions are simply sent to an individual, and then they take a while to thoughtfully compose responses, and then they send them back. Upon reading their initial answers, one can follow up with questions. In effect, this is a guest spot in the course, not unlike what we're talking about as a guest lecture. One could simply video or audio record your colleague's lecture, perhaps in their own class, and then share it with your class. Now, here I'm hoping that the colleague has graciously offered to field questions from your class that again can be done by email instead of or in addition to being within the course management system, especially when non-members of the class might be difficult to put in there due to administrative limits or blocks at the policy level. We also need to consider the contrast between online and face-to-face classroom experience. This is something of a straw man argument, but we'll at least give it a run for the sake of having done it. Would having a guest in a face-to-face classroom be somewhat different, better or worse than a guest online? In a classroom, one can see and feel the enthusiasm or zeal of a lecturer in a classroom. In an online class, there can be written, audio, and video elements to the guest lecture presentation, but is it different enough to matter? With any guest lecture, there's the lecture or presentation, and then there's the follow-up. The questions, comments, and discussion follow, whether it's orally or in writing. My assertion here is that while it may feel a little different, the fundamental value is the same. So, what would we tell or ask anyone we want to guest lecture for us? Well, we would give them a topic or outer limits of the discussion. We would identify the time frame and expectations. And we might suggest or propose a range of feasible actions that they will need to carry out the task. For instance, they might provide an initial written piece or audio or video recording, plus supporting material if necessary, to serve as their guest lecture, much like I'm doing here. Then they would log into the course management system at least once a day and provide substantial answers or responses to student questions and comments within 24 hours, each day for the X number of days of the guest experience. That's not too different from asking someone to A, prepare a 25-minute presentation on the topic we've discussed, B, show up at the appointed time and place, and C, field questions and comments after the presentation or the remainder of the class period, and then by email for the next X number of days. Now, to get someone to climb into your course management system and your class and be a guest there will take someone who is fairly comfortable with that proposition. Make it too difficult and it simply won't work. This might be another reason in favor of having the questions and answers happen by email or in an external system like a separate blog with questions. Does anyone here have that experience? Now, while many of us may have grown up thinking that only synchronous lectures are valid, it creates scheduling challenges for an online class that, in my opinion, are largely unnecessary. Most of the power of an online learning experience is in the asynchronous opportunities that it creates. Otherwise, it's a conference call or a web conference. Now, if it is synchronous, many people may not be able to participate in real time because of the schedule demands in our personal lives and time zone differences that might be seemingly minor between Chicago and Indianapolis, but are a lot more formidable between Chicago and Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. Further, you might note that if you're using a viewing option in a discussion board that nests your discussion format posts according to original posts, it's easier to stay with a topic using a forum tool asynchronously than it is to make sense of a rapid-fire chat or Twitter stream in synchronous real time. Now, maybe it's just me, maybe not. Now, maybe this doesn't need to be said, but if the session isn't being recorded, if you miss the session, you've missed it all, except for shared notes by someone who attends. An asynchronous discussion is by its nature a recording of the discussion as it plays out. There's a funny thing here. This is one feature of the now defunct Google Wave technology that I was really looking forward to seeing play out. It just never happened. Saw some great demos. Further note on time commitment. I'd be sure that you put a time limit on your expectations. If you're working with a colleague, I'm thinking that you shouldn't need a whole lot of incentive to get them to play. I can't think of any specific incentives to recommend to get them to do this. Yet this is another reason for keeping this a limited time offer. If you open up for too long, it might make the perceived workload versus benefit calculation get too far out of whack. Now, another angle is the question of whether or not we know the guest. In most of the MVCR guest lecture situations, and likely the same with many of you, the instructor knows the guest, and the guest knows the instructor. In fact, there is a guest lecture series page on the ION site with a collection of guest lecture materials. I can't tell you who started the page or who named it, but it appears that it's been in place for quite some time and was managed initially by an ION staff that was considerably larger than it is today. In the last 5 years, there's been relatively little new posted until just recently when I decided that this is something that I can manage doing while I do the other things for ION. Now, other kinds of guests could conceivably contribute without ever knowing it. A visit to TED.com or the MIT Open Courseware Project illustrates the validity of the source material. There is a question of follow-up. With an absentee guest lecture, one can expect little or no interaction on the part of the guest. One might still call or write with questions, but there's just no counting on responses. Depending on your needs, that may be everything required. Now, administratively, there can be several issues. Will the guest be paid? Is the guest a legitimate expert and thus qualified to serve in the intended capacity? What will be the manner of the guest presence or presentation? Are there policies that regulate, prohibit, or encourage guest lecturers? Will someone physically come to the campus in a specific building or room at a specific time? That person might need a parking pass and directions. That person might need to be pre-approved as a campus visitor with campus security police. In fact, it's quite useful to provide a host to meet that guest or visitor as early as possible to lead him or her to their destination. Regarding an additional technology issue, there are a couple different approaches. Now, in MVCR, we typically install the guest as another instructor facilitator in the course. This gives the guest the opportunity to post materials as an instructor with all the necessary permissions and clearance. Now, depending on the student information system and course management system, it can be easy or practically impossible to accomplish this guest as instructor trick. Of course, this also gives the guest access to student grades throughout the course, and that may or may not be permissible or appropriate. Alternately, the guest may need to post materials to a blog or external website and then point everyone there. Some of you may have seen this or even have personal experience with this approach. Unfortunately, follow-up can be challenging as well. I'll be interested to hear from any of you with those experiences. We could use an external technology like Skype for the visit. In the context of Skype, though, it's a cool technology, but it has some undesirable characteristics. Here at the university, our institutional IT folks strongly recommend against installing and using Skype, or at least letting it start and run in the background. Because when it's resident in memory, apparently your computer is subject to being tasked by Skype headquarters with some support computing, which also consumes internet bandwidth. Now, Skype doesn't have a native feature to record calls. You need to install a separate software or an add-on to save that audio or video conversation. So, perhaps I've made a decent case for guest lectures, and maybe not. At the very least, I hope I've planted some seeds for discussion. I look forward to fielding your comments and questions in the forum below.